Fantastic. Well, welcome and good evening, everyone. First item on the agenda is apologies. So I'm just going to pass over to Alice for those.
Yeah, thank you. So we have apologies from Councillor Sanderson. Sorry, I was getting a bit of feedback from the live stream then, but we're all good now.
Fantastic. And then does anyone have any declarations of interest? Not seeing any. I don't have any chair's announcements. So next thing we need to do is approve the notes of the previous meeting. Are we happy to approve the minutes? Nod is fine. Councillors? Yeah, okay, fantastic. Seeing some nods. And the next item is the work plan. So I'm just going to pass over to Alice again to introduce that.
Thank you. So yeah, the work plan is included in the agenda pack. It's been updated since the last meeting. The panel was updated at the previous meeting on the status of a couple of scrutiny commissioned items, but in terms of a further update on any outstanding items, it's just in relation to the Housing Association's approach to tenant engagement scope, which was agreed at the October meeting. So that's not yet scheduled in, but I'll be working with officers on this and I'll keep the panel informed as that develops. So the panel's just asked to agree the work plan as included in the agenda pack or with any amendments.
Fantastic. And is everyone happy to agree that?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Alice. Okay, so next I'd just like to welcome Councillor Linda Smith, Nerys Perry, Bill Graves, Malcolm Peake and Steve Stansfield. And if you could introduce the report on building safety and compliance within the housing revenue account stock, please.
Sorry, Chair. So it is the housing performance monitoring
Oh,
item
I just
first.
completely
However, Amy's just been in touch to say she's having some difficulties joining, so it might be that you actually do want to take that item first.
Very sorry, everyone. I just failed to read. So I thought that was first. And I was like, oh, not on my agenda, but it is. So in that case, I think if Amy's still struggling to join, probably is best to do it in the order I suggested, if everyone's happy with that. Fantastic. Then again, I'll pass to Councillor Smith, Nerys, Bill, Malcolm and Steve, if you wouldn't mind introducing that one. Sorry.
Let's say a few words first. I know you probably would rather hear from the officers, but I'll be quick. Just to say, obviously, this is the most, it's the biggest responsibility I think that we have as a landlord. I mean, that's certainly, I feel that, and I know the officers working in this area do too. So even before the horrors of Grenfell, it was something we were very serious about and wouldn't compromise on. Made the decision then, when we were looking to invest in the tower blocks, to go above and beyond what was required, or even what might be expected, and made the very sound decision then to install sprinklers in all of our tower blocks, a decision which has served us well, actually. And despite the ongoing problems with the cladding, which are on the way to being resolved, we still have the confidence of the fire service with those tower blocks, and tenants are able to be reassured by the fire service that their homes are safe, which is a really reassuring position to be in. The other thing I'd like to flag up really is sort of mold and damp. And after the horrific case of our Bishak and the inquest identifying mold and damp in his home as being a cause of the 3-year-old's death, I think the council acted very fast to respond to that, putting together a team to focus on mold and damp, being really proactive, writing to tenants, asking them whether they had any issues, if they had issues before, had they been resolved, and really stepping up our game in that area and making sure that we didn't walk away from properties where black mold was occurring saying it's because you're drying your laundry inside, it's because you're cooking, you know, like everyone else. You know, we really became, you know, realized that we had to accept that that is how we use their properties, and we need them to support them to use their properties as they might expect to do so in a safe way, and really go above and beyond when it comes to improving extraction, and other steps to make sure that there's no mold and damp in properties. So those have been a focus, and you know, this is a really important area that, you know, I catch up with on officers regularly. So it continues to be a high priority for us. So yeah, that's all I'd like to say for now. Look forward to the comments from the panel later. Thanks.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. Do any of the officers want to contribute before we move to questions from the panel?
Can I ask Steve Stansfield just to give you a quick introduction to the report, please? Steve, if you can just take councillors just a quick overview, that I think that might be helpful.
Thanks so much.
So yeah, as you can see, title of the report, building safety compliance with our holding stock. The purpose of it is to give you information on building safety compliance performance relating to that stock.
Sorry, I can't really hear you.
I think we might have a few issues with the sound. It might be an internet speed issue. Sorry, I know that's a bit of a perennial one in Oxford. I got some of that, but I think some of the councillors are struggling to get it. So maybe if you speak a bit slower, sorry, and then hopefully it will come across a bit more clearly.
Yeah, switching your camera off might help as well. Often it does. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to give that a go. So I don't know how much of it you caught. I just obviously took you through the report, title, the purpose of the report. Just going a little bit into the content. So there's an overview of our building type. It goes on to
I don't think that's working.
Yeah, sorry. I think that might be not your fault, Steve, but I think the internet's just not holding up for that. Yes, Malcolm.
Just checking. Can everybody hear me clearly? Yeah. Okay. In that case, if I just do a quick overview of the report, if Steve, if you don't mind. So the report focuses on, obviously, as Councillor Smith outlined, as a landlord, we've got massive responsibilities for compliance. Part of that is ensuring that we are compliant with the statutory requirements, so gas inspections, electrical testing, those sort of basic levels. The report outlines those. It gives a brief overview of some of the key legislation elements. That's not all of them by a long degree, but it is certainly the key component ones, and there's more coming in. So the report focuses on actually giving confidence to the current position of where we are. We are monitoring now our monthly compliance reporting, probably better than we ever have. It's a very positive position. Our results are actually quite in a very good position with it as well. And it gets reported through a structure up to CMT with the health and safety feed into CMT for the executive directors to be aware as well. So it has a very high level focus on a monthly basis, and then reviewed again on a quarterly basis. So you'll see from the performance monitoring on page 4 and 5, it gives us the sort of sites of where we are, and we work very closely with ODS on that, who manage some of the programs for us with our oversight, and we commission the programs via them. Some of them are commissioned externally for specialist items such as fire safety, water tank and water safety as well. So overall, the report, is reflecting our current position, which is a positive one, and goes on to talk about obviously current issues that we've got with WAC. You will all be probably aware of the rack concrete issue. We've carried out surveys for that, and we continue to look at some of the structural reports. The high risk tower blocks, because of the cladding works that are going on, we have a retained structural engineer anyway on that project. They've confirmed that rack is not present in our high risk buildings, i.e. them. As Councillor Smith mentioned earlier, damp and mould, we have a work group that focuses on that. It's very proactive. That's made up of people from all across the council and ODS to be proactive in resolving any damp and mould issues. That will also be included in the capital programme. So as we go through and replace key component elements to the properties, we'll be improving on that all the time. We also have quite a wide energy programme coming into play, Social Housing Decarb Fund. So we're including corporate elements of that within for ventilation when we do fabric measures to improve homes. So the summary there is that, whilst there's always room for improvement and there are clear areas of further investment that are needed and improvement into properties, specifically because of the changing regulations, and we're seeing challenges now with new legislations coming in constantly. The compliance is actually in a positive place, and we continue to develop programs of work and projects to address the compliance needs and make sure we're ahead of the game and resourced accordingly. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm seeing some hands. That's really helpful. I've got a couple, but I'll go to other councillors first. So, Councillor Aziz, if you could bunch your questions together, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for giving us that overview, Malcolm. My question really is about, are we confident that the tenants who are reporting these specific issues, particularly around mould, do we feel that they understand that it's really important and urgent for them to report when this comes up? And also, are we satisfied with the amount of time it's taking for us to respond to them in the initial phase? So I don't have anything to suggest that both these things are not being done. I would just like to understand clearly. What I have found, though, from doing casework, knocking on doors, is often what happens is someone has reported an incident in a property about something a while ago, and then they say they've not heard back or something's happened, and then they just don't communicate with the council at all. And then when I've raised that specifically with Councillor Linda Smith, it's been dealt with immediately with officers. So it seems that if there's a lack of confidence in one area around a housing property issue, then tenants don't necessarily go on to record really important information for us to have. So I'd just like to get a bit of clarity on that, please. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, you're happy for me to respond on that? Yeah. So absolutely. The 2 points in one is encouraging tenants to raise issues with us. We've got a number of ways which that's been encouraged through newsletters and tenant communications, and also via other reactive repairs. So if ODS receive a call out to go and fix a window or door or something like that, then actually that's asked at that point in time. So there's a significant piece of work to encourage tenants. We want to go further. We want to have the work team at the moment was in fact last week discussing looking at a campaign throughout the next year, especially in the winter periods, to actually engage with tenants, not just to be sort of repeating the same thing. So we have plans for further communication campaigns. In regards to the time taken, this has created a challenge in terms of response. If we ask all the tenants, do you have a problem? We've got to expect the significant response of all levels, and we are getting damp issues that need urgent resolving, to ones that just need wiping down, sort of type of thing. So we're trying to understand the nature of each complaint and respond to it, and then prioritize it accordingly, and especially with its high risks with families and children and health issues. So are we perfect? No, we're not. Is there more we can do? Yes, there is, and we are working on that, and the working group is certainly focused on those points exactly to get back to people. we are community. We have the contact centre and obviously the housing teams, and everybody's fully briefed on the urgency of it, and we are treating them as high priority cases.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Councillor Aziz?
Yes, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Councillor Rule?
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation and paper. I was going to ask a question about the fire doors and regulations on tower blocks, recognising that the new legislation has come in on buildings at 5 or more floors. And I wondered whether what work is being done on those that are less than 5 floors, but maybe multiple. And in my ward in particular, there was a fire in a low rise, but I know that they're awaiting fire door changes. So this is really urgent, I suppose, and it'd be great to have an understanding of that timeline.
Okay, thank you. So in and I won't bore you with sort of technical issues on this, but enclosed corridors need to have FD30s, which is fire door 30 minutes. Composite doors are not fit for purpose on those, but they can be used where you're exiting a building externally into open air. So we are going through and fitting solid timber doors, which are compliant, and we know they're compliant. The industry's got a lot of issues around this at the moment, and it has been since Grenfell. Now, these are not always the popular decisions for tenants because blank, sort of more or less blank and very unattractive doors are having to be installed, as opposed to the nice sort of composite ones that we saw before. So it doesn't always go down well with tenants, but it is required. So it's worth noting that. In the high rise, we have a program that's going through now. We've done Foresters, and we're now working on even load, and we should be finishing even load early in the new year, and then we'll be doing all the other high rise. I meet regularly with the Oxford Fire Safety Rescue team. They are actually stated frequently in those meetings that they're very happy. In fact, we are ahead as a council on our safety mechanisms on this. Partly of that is actually, as Councillor Smith highlighted earlier, that the sprinkler systems were put in place, and actually we were fairly forward thinking in the past. My predecessors, sort of planned for today's contingency, thankfully. So from the tower block point of view, high risk, we're working on the fire doors, not popular necessarily with residents, but unfortunately required at the moment. On the low rise, which is less of a risk, obviously from a high rise point of view, we are now looking to embark early in the new year on a program, or put together a program of fire doors on those same contained corridors where we have smaller low rise. So we do need to go across the whole stock. We're not quite sure what that looks like at the moment, because we have been focusing on the high rise, high risk elements. So, but we will be going across the entire portfolio in due course to look at all of the small blocks where you might have, six flats in a block. So they are coming, but they're less of a risk at the moment as compared to the high end. And the fire brigade are very happy with what we're doing and the strategy that we've implemented.
Fantastic. Does that answer your question, Councillor Rule? Brilliant. Okay. Does any other councillors have any questions? Not seeing any, so I might move on to mine. So I noticed in the report that, you mentioned it's just to do with kind of access issues and things, and I appreciate there aren't that many units, but lift servicing and maintenance is one of the only areas where we're not up to on the sort of 100% point with the compliancy. I wondered sort of why that was, any steps sort of, I think especially I can understand with stair lifts that might be an access issue, but with passenger lifts, are those referring to lifts like inside blocks? What are kind of the issues there as well?
Yeah, so those the stair lifts, certainly they are lifts inside properties, which bizarrely enough we do get challenges on in terms of getting into service. And I think it's one of those things that where they're working, people are sort of kind of not interested in sort of necessarily giving access. They've got higher priorities of going to work and that sort of thing. It's only when they actually stop working that they really give us access, for obviously. In terms of the passenger lifts, there's been one or two that have been down, but overall the compliance rate is marked because there's an expectancy and it has a big impact. So generally, we're actually fairly compliant. We have, I mean, for example, we have one at the moment in one of the tower blocks that's not working, and it's going to take a few days to get it back up and running. And these are quite complex where we need parts, or there's quite a they're one of those things that the impact of lifts, they don't go wrong very often, but when they do, it really highlights it, and it causes a lot of uncomfort and discomfort to people, if they're disabled or pregnant and that sort of thing, and people have to climb stairs. So we're consciously aware of that, and again, Steve and his team maintain those monthly and monitor them via the lift contractor. I hope that helps.
Fantastic. No, that's really helpful. In terms of mentioned that you work with quite a few external partners, do you find kind of that is there any kind of difference in how you have to kind of work? How do you manage sort of working with internal partners as sort of opposed to external partners?
Well, the external partners are specialists, so we use them for the very sort of technically lifts being an example, water treatment, and certainly high risk. And the other factor to that is we are kind of contemplate, although obviously we work very closely with ODS on a day-to-day basis, there's also risk factors that we need to take into account for the council. So if there is a high risk item, and I would say, for example, cladding of the tower blocks, we wouldn't necessarily want to take that risk on board for the council. We would seek that to be with an external contractor and mitigate any risk from the council for that. But we generally work very well, both internal and external contractors, and we have a very good team that works towards that.
Fantastic. And I guess just to sort of round out what Councillor Rule was saying about so what is the process for kind of prioritising the fire door work? What kind of, are you sort of going through kind of level of risk of flats? Are you kind of bringing anything else in, like sort of vulnerability of residents?
It's based on the property, which is the guidance gives us that. So and it's the guidance is in conjunction also with the fire office, fire service, and it is obviously high rise is the biggest challenge, and then working down to lower rise blocks and working across with them.
And just, I guess, on that sort of final question, bar one, on that one are you finding, obviously there's the kind of difficulty with residents in terms sometimes, as Councillor Rule was you were pointing out, with kind of the aesthetics, but are you finding that any residents because I know that fire doors can sometimes be a bit trickier to open just because they're heavy? Is that anything that's been done to mitigate that, or is that something
it's very difficult? I understand that, and this has cropped up a couple of times, but we really have to follow the requirements and the regulations on that, and the fire doors are set, and the building regulations are set that we have to follow, and unfortunately they do provide real challenges sometimes in the weight of the door, and we totally understand that. We can't mitigate, and the problem is that when we have a high rise block, any floor below, any sort of compromise which could make something non-compliant will jeopardize everybody who lives in that block. And that's why we have to take a sort of zero tolerance approach on it. We have to make sure the entire block is safe for all the residents, and that's a real challenge. And I know that Bill and his team have worked with residents to say, well, actually, if there has to be alternatives, perhaps, sort of lower rise accommodation for people that may not be able to manage that, and we'll work with the residents to try and resolve the issues around it.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. Just I wasn't sort of, obviously it needs to be compliant, and that's then good to hear that you've kind of looked at solutions where that's not a possibility for some of the residents. And finally, this is really useful to see, and we get quite a lot of sort of monitoring stuff coming back to this committee. Might this be something that we can see sort of more frequently? I don't know how often this data gets or these reports get published, but it's really useful to kind of see just and to hear about as the panel.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yes, well, we do them monthly. So obviously, if the panel decides they want a frequency to see these, we're more than happy to provide whatever data you ask for.
Oh, fantastic. We might add, I don't know if we can, I'll ask Alice to take it away, but maybe we get, is it quarterly, the other?
Annually.
Biannually. So it's maybe something, yeah. Thanks very much. And thanks all of you for coming along to introduce the report. Unless anyone else has got any further questions or recommendations. Not seeing any, in which case I'm going to suggest we now jump back. Does that make sense, to jump back in the agenda to item 6? And in this case, sorry, Amy, I understand you had a few issues joining, so we skipped it and we've gone back, if that's okay. So I'll introduce Councillor Smith, Neris and Amy to introduce this report. I don't know who wants to go first.
Councillor Smith, are you happy for me to introduce the report, or would you like to say anything? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Yes.
This is the performance report. Yeah, what it go for Amy? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And apologies for being late as well. I had some technical difficulties. Yes, I think the report has been circulated in the agenda and provides an overview of the performance against kind of key measures in the first 6 months of this year. The figures kind of shown in the report are correct as of the end of September, and the figures that I'll be referring to as well will also be as of September. So I'll go through quickly now an overview of kind of what's in the report, particularly highlighting in areas where we're not meeting targets, the mitigations that we're putting in place, and kind of highlighting any key achievements in areas. And I'll leave time at the end for any questions as well from anyone. So in the affordable housing supply area, two kind of targets within there. One is around the affordable development target, which is linked to our 4-year target. As of the end of September, we were marginally but behind on this target, but just to flag, but that was only by 9 units, which is something like 0.5% of the overall target. And that forecast has since gone up since the end of October to bring us back up to targets. I've put kind of a small reasoning in the comments in the report as to why that was, but it's linked to a 22 unit scheme in Barton, where the original developers has pulled out, and colleagues are kind of continuing to review that scheme and hope to bring it kind of back on board at a later stage. There's also a 53 unit development in Oxpens and Oxwed scheme, which some units have now fallen out of that 4-year target, but will be developed slightly later, so that they will be kind of brought on board at a later date. As social units wise, we're on track to meet our targets there, with 44 social units brought on board this year, and another 73 for the rest of the financial year. So despite a really challenging financial climate where other providers are withdrawing from investments, we're continuing to see really good progress against this delivery target, and colleagues are working to secure further opportunities in that area. Moving on to council stock and the energy performance certificate target. As of the target this year, we are currently on track. We've successfully secured social housing decarbonisation fund, which will see 316 properties with an EPC rating below C being targeted and kind of improved. That project is due to start on site in January. Surveys have been completed on a large proportion of those properties. I wanted to kind of mention a little bit more. You may notice from the report that our target for the end of this year has decreased slightly on our end of year target. So it looks like we are hoping to perform in lesser than we did last year. So I wanted to try and explain that today as if I can, as best as possible. So as part of our stock condition surveys in all of our properties, in all of our stock, energy performance certificates are being carried out as part of that, where an EPC was either previously below a C rating or was missing. as part of those stock condition surveys, our coverage of energy performance certificates across all of our stock is increasing, which is why you have seen that's our kind of estimated estimate of percentage of properties with an EPC rating below C has changed slightly this year. And obviously that's linked to a wider target of getting that to only 5% of our stock being EPC rating below C by 2030. So that although it appears that it's reducing, actually it's a positive that we're finding out more information about our stock, and we're having those assessments carried out on properties. And obviously part of our longer term plan which would require significant investment to decarbonise our council homes there. So hopefully that explains it slightly, but I thought I would try and explain before we get any questions about that. Relet time, I've mentioned this in previous presentations that I've done on the performance reports, but we remain not meeting kind of our target on relet times. Have you all seen that that has improved significantly over the last kind of six to 12 months? And we continue to put further mitigations in place to slowly reduce that figure. I've mentioned in the report that a new handling procedure has gone live, which is reducing the time taken to get keys to ODS to start the void works. And there's also significant or some delays in the allocations team, actually allocating void properties, and that links to an increased pressure that team is seeing in booking bed and breakfast and emergency hotel accommodation, which I'll speak about later in the report. But plans are in place to recruit to additional roles to support work in that area. And we're adapting our processes for managing placements in the bed and breakfast linked to the increase in demand. So there is work going on to try and reduce that. And there's a wider piece of work which has started, which is a review of our end-to-end process of lettings, which is going to be carried out across all services that are involved in that quite lengthy process. So in time, we hope to see that relet time reduce significantly. With regards to our gas safety supply compliance and our KPI performance against repairs, we have a kind of strong performance throughout the year in all of our priorities. 100% gas safety compliance, and even despite I think 22% increase in repairs over a 12-month period, we're still meeting all our targets in relation to them being completed on time, and overall I think there's a 96% completed on time, and that's an average across all repairs. Just to mention the locale service for repairs, which has been implemented this year, which provides text messages, reminders to tenants about appointments, as well as a transactional survey on the kind of the completion of the job by an operative. So feedback from that has been really positive, and operatives are kind of actively seeking from tenants how they've been rated, and getting feedback from tenants as they go. And any kind of unsatisfactory scores are being flagged on a dashboard to team leaders, who will contact that tenant directly to try and resolve issues. So just want to flag that as a good piece of work that's happening in that area. Rent collection, we are kind of on target for rent collection, and as of the end of September we were running at 11% decrease from the same time last year. So whilst we're kind of in a cost of living crisis, I think that's a real testament to the teams working within the income officers. I know they have a new approach to consistent monitoring of arrears, and they now have kind of a dedicated incomes officer for all arrears cases who is contacting tenants consistently to support them with their arrears. Moving on to the homelessness section now, so rough sleeping and some of our statutory temporary accommodation KPIs. I alluded to this earlier, but we're kind of seeing a really high demand on homelessness services, which is dramatically increased over the last 12 months, and in particular this financial year. To give kind of a really kind of obvious indication of that increase is last year we were seeing an average of needing to place 4 households per week, and that's increased to an average of 8 placements per week at the moment. So we're kind of, and that's linked to almost probably a doubling the presentations to homelessness services as well, people approaching us for assistance. So that's kind of a national trend that we're seeing coming through. It's not just an increase within Oxford City. I'm sure you've kind of seen that within the news, the increase in homelessness and temporary accommodation costs, etc., across local authorities. So we see that we are fortunately above our temporary accommodation targets for the year, with some of the highest rates that we've seen for many years. But we're kind of putting mitigations in place to try and reduce the use of emergency accommodation, such as bed and breakfasts. Plans are underway to set up a new private sector leasing model to reduce the use of bed and breakfast accommodation. And there's some rapid development of long-term plans to increase our overall temporary accommodation stock in that area to hopefully reduce the cost. There's also been some recent announcements that will raise the local housing allowance rates, which we hope will reduce evictions from private rented sector, which are linked to affordability. And that will definitely kind of dramatically improve our abilities to prevent homelessness from families and increases our move on options for them. So we're hoping that will kind of reduce households approaching us and give us more opportunities to rapidly move people on. So although our temporary accommodation numbers remain high, our kind of length of stays in temporary accommodation is still reducing. So we're still slightly over our target, but they have reduced from the end of last year, which I think in the climate and with kind of the high demand that we're seeing is again really positive. And actually our average time in temporary accommodation has reduced to the lowest been since we started the transformation to rapidly rehouse households. So that the average length of stay in temporary accommodation is coming down. So that's really successful. We've recently kind of compared ourselves to other local authorities with some statutory homelessness data, which we call HCLIC. And actually, when you compare us to authorities similar to us, our temporary accommodation numbers are still much lower in comparison to them. And that's been flagged by kind of recent conversations with Department of Levelling Up and Housing Communities as well. So yeah, comparing us to colleagues, we're managing as much as we can, and we're doing really well. With regards to rough sleeping, the number of rough sleepers without an offer accommodation is below target, and it's down to 24 from 36 from the same period last year. That's demonstrating some of the really good work going on with our team and partners to find suitable accommodation for rough sleepers. And just to mention as well, actually, that we've recently received some additional funding to increase resources in frontline teams linked to responding to the demand in homelessness. So we hope again that will be able to support us to prevent households from becoming homeless. Yeah, so I think that's it from me. So I'll hand back to Councillor Diggins, but as always, happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for introducing that, Amy. If you're happy for us to go straight to questions, Councillor Smith, unless obviously welcome to add anything if you'd like to. Okay, fantastic. I've got a few questions. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? Fantastic. Thank you. Councillor Aziz, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for the breadth of work that's been done. I very much appreciate that the resource that's needed to do this work is missing from central government. So there's, we're pushing to the limits in terms of what we're trying to do. So that's the first point I'd like to make, and just say thank you to everyone. I asked this a while ago, so forgive me for repeating myself, but I'm really interested to know how many children are on our housing waiting register, and how many children show up in our statistics, and obviously they don't show up, families do, but I think it's important for us to be able to record that, to understand the level, an additional level of, because it doesn't show that. The other point was specifically, I think, Neris, you may hopefully be able to help me with this, but we had the domestic abuse review group, the cross-party one, and one of the findings from the group that was adopted by the council was to try and get accreditation for the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance. So I was wondering where we are with that, because myself, in the last couple of weeks in particular, I've had a number of women coming forward as casework, talking about their housing needs, which when I flagged again to Councillor Linda Smith and officers, there's been an immediate response. So I'm just wondering where we are with that. And I understand that we don't have any more resource and the needs are huge, but how do we communicate on that particular issue? So if there are individuals in the city who are, you know, at risk, along with potentially with their children, who are struggling with this particular issue, how do we communicate that the council is and a local authority that is, you know, focusing on this issue and that has sensitivity on it as well? And then the only other thing to say is, obviously, I appreciate that temporary accommodation is not what we want. We don't want that for anyone. And I know our costs are spiraling along with other local authorities. So I'd be keen to know what kind of lobbying work we're doing, what kind of advocacy work we're doing behind the scenes on this, to central government. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd be happy to come back on those, Amy and Neris, and then I'll move along to. I can see Alice got a hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just quickly wanted to come in on Councillor Aziz's point about the DAHA accreditation, just to highlight that there is a report that Scrutiny Committee commission that's coming to the January meeting, so that might help cover off that one in January.
Great. I look forward to the January meeting then, Alice. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so if Amy and Neris happy to come back on that, then I'll go back to Councillor Rule.
Yeah, I can take the point regarding kind of the figures on families on the general register and temporary accommodation, if you're happy to. We have got figures on those that I'm happy to share. I can pull them out after the meeting and share them with you, to ensure we're just getting those right figures across to you. But yeah, it's definitely something we can get across.
I'm happy to pick up the
yeah.
next two questions. So on pending the report coming in January, DAHA work is progressing. We have a project manager appointed to sort of drive the work. It's a significant piece of work that will take until 2025 for us to kind of get that accreditation. But just to give assurance, it is underway, and Liz Jones leads on that work, and Dawn Thompson is appointed to the project management of that work going forward. So we'll bring a full report to you in January. And I suppose it's just worth mentioning, you know, we are a council that has a very, very good sanctuary scheme in place. You know, it's regarded to be one of the best, and it's something that we deploy very frequently, and we put quite a significant kind of prevention funds towards its facilitation. So and of course Richard's team, as part of options, is there in terms of either whether it's prevention or relief duties to pick up our kind of support and advice for all victims of DA. So you know, please do make sure that they are contacting the teams, and we have, you know, significant resource to dedicated. We understand there's changing case law, etc., in this area, and we're well versed in understanding what that is. Shall I just pick up the lobbying one quickly? We've actually, so in terms of lobbying work, we were part of the Emergency Homelessness Summit that occurred a couple of weeks ago. And we were one of the signatories of the letter that went in prior to the autumn statement. And I guess, and one of the asks of that letter was, of course, was to raise the LHA rates, which, you know, was good news in the autumn statement. And I think for Richard's team, that will strengthen their prevention ability, certainly immediately, and especially from the 1st of April when that kicks in. So we've been part of kind of national groups, and we continue then to sort of form our own lobbying positions on very specific matters to the city. And Richard and I have got a pending piece of work kind of on that following what was done for the autumn statement and additional work that we want to do sort of more locally to this authority. So quite a lot of activity there. There's a commitment that we understand that that is a key plank of 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 work that we need to do to get the national policy changes that are really, without them, we are fighting a fire with limited resources. So actually the other point in the autumn statement was there was going to be some increase in homelessness prevention grant. I mean, that is good news, but I think we always feel that that is short-term in nature, it's piecemeal, and we continue to sort of lobby for long-term stable funding regimes that we can kind of plan our workforce, plan our strategies and policies accordingly. But we welcome it nevertheless. I will leave that there unless Richard wants to just add anything.
I think you covered all the main points. So the only thing I was going to add on DA, there's been a significant rise in presentations over the last year, which is obviously not good to see, but good to at least know that we are supporting people. That is linked to the case law changes, and that we now need to help more people, which is obviously is a good thing in this area. The only other thing also then on the autumn statement was they have announced further funding going into the local authority housing fund, LAF3. That will be capital money for potentially new temporary accommodation purchases. So we don't know the details of that fund yet, and if we're going to make a bid or not. But that's obviously something we'll be interested to see the details that comes out of central government, and potentially a bit of further help there as well.
Thank you. Did Councillor Smith, did you want to come in on this?
Just on the lobbying aspect, yeah, just to add that Councillor Ed Turner is a member of the Resources Policy Board of the LGA, and I'm on the People and Places Policy Board. So we both take every opportunity there to feed into the local government association's response and conversation with government on these issues as well.
Thank you. Does that sort of address your questions, Councillor Aziz?
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for your work.
Fantastic. Councillor Rule, your questions.
Thank you so much. Yes, I had one. I had two questions, and the first is kind of like more general, I suppose. I just wondered whether particularly on the red items, whether we felt like the mitigations that we're taking will help us reach those targets, or we still think that even with those mitigations in place, are we expecting to miss any of those targets? Just sort of a general question to get a sense of that, recognising the difficulties that we face generally. And then the second question was, and I apologise, this might require a little bit more clarification, and I may have missed it, and you were very clear, I think. But I was just wondering about on the EPC rating and the decarbonisation of homes. My understanding was then that the reason why it's 95% is because 5% we've found to be at the right level. Is that correct? Or were you suggesting that there's a change? Sorry, I just wondered whether I could have that clarifying, because I may have a question following, but I might have misunderstood.
So the 5%, sorry, is our longer term target. So that's to have 5% of homes with an EPC rating below C by 2030. At the moment, we believe it's around 30%. But as you can imagine, that's we have kind of a longer term plan to bring that down to the 5%. So I don't know if that helps slightly or clarifies.
Yeah, I think so. I think I was thinking something completely different. So yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
On the red rags, should I do the TA ones, and then I don't know, Neris, do you want to do the relet time one? So in regards to the two TA ones, in regards to households over 12 months, I think we're well on track with that progress. If we didn't have so much demand for our TA, we would have reached that target by now, and that was always an ambitious target to get to 7 over 12 months. 2 years ago it was something like 40 or something households, so we've made huge progress over a 2-year period. We are still determined to get that down even lower, and we are ticking towards that, but it's just this constant pressure on the service around temporary accommodation that just means it's slowing that progress, but we are on track. So I think that one's I'm confident on. In regards to the overall numbers in TA, it's a huge challenge, and obviously what we've just been discussing and Amy's presentation, this is a national challenge, and we are really dependent on central government help to really get on top of that. Having said that, we are doing a huge amount in Oxford to try to contain numbers. A lot of that is focused on increasing our temporary accommodation stock, because whereas we have a body of stock about 120 units we can use to house people at any one time, these are actual flats and houses. If we go over that, we then inevitably have to use B&B and short-term kind of arrangements that are just not good for anyone. And in particular, we have a target around 6 weeks for any family to be in that arrangement, and we are sticking as best we can to that and doing absolutely every intervention when someone reaches 6 weeks for children in that kind of accommodation to move them on. So we are increasing our stock. We're looking at basically working with private landlords to lease their units to use that accommodation. We are also using every lever we have available to us to move people on from TA as soon as possible to free up the stock. So we've reached and gone over our private rented sector procurement targets for move on to the PRS this year, and we're well on track to meet our targets around social lettings to homeless families to move them on out of temporary accommodation as well. And then on top of that, again, we're also trying to prevent as many people as possible from ever needing temporary accommodation. So the homelessness prevention grant uplift we received this year from central government, we've pumped that into prevention and advice services and housing options to try to keep people from ever needing temporary accommodation. So we are throwing and mitigating everything we can in this area. The Chancellor's announcement the other week of the rise in local housing allowance will be a huge help. We can keep more people in the accommodation they're currently living in, but equally, if they are homeless, we can procure more accommodation because we can pay a higher rate. I think the only thing I would say, having said all of that, though, is that whereas we can mitigate cost, and we have a plan to do that with these moving more sustainable models. I think it's likely that there will be higher TA usage going forward for the foreseeable future, just because of the homelessness situation we're in as a country now, and every local authority's rates going up. So while we can mitigate cost, it's likely that we will just have more TA for the foreseeable future until something changes nationally. So it might be that we do have to review these kind of KPIs in the years ahead if they're not realistic anymore. Yeah, very difficult situation, but hopefully that gives a bit more information.
Thank you. Does that answer your questions, Councillor Rule? Fantastic. I've got a couple of questions just on understanding the report a bit better. The relet time, is that number of days?
It is, if I can come in on that, Councillor. And I think that's one of the questions that was being asked previously. As it mentioned in the report, we have got an end-to-end process review underway. In terms of relet times, pre-COVID, we were at 17 days. So there has been a change. There's been a number of factors. One of them has been alluded to by Amy in terms of the allocations team are being pulled left, right and centre in terms of emergency placements and temporary accommodation, which means they're having to prioritise that, which is having a big impact on that final stage. There's also work that's going on in regard to the point at which ODS can actually start work, because there's a number of properties which are coming in, which either require an asbestos survey, or if the properties where someone's passed away and it's been over a month, we need to get the Legionella testing and the chlorination going. That's impacted on the time at which they can actually start. So straight away, we're into almost a couple of weeks in many cases before work can even start. So the point of the review is to squeeze every single day out of every element of the process. Whether we'll ever get to the glory days of 17 days when we're still needing the asbestos surveys, I really doubt. But we're even tried to do that, where we're organising for those who are in the higher bands of the transfer register to have early visits by the void surveyor, so we can actually get those organised in advance of people moving. So there's lots of things that we're doing, but it is a a movable feast. It involves tenancy management, ODS, allocations, and then tenancy management again, as well as property services for the major voids. The major voids has been an issue over the past year, mainly because of, in the main because of the acquisitions program that's supporting NSAP, RSAP, Ukrainian, Afghan refugees. And Housing First, because when they're coming in, buying off the open market, many of them are not up to our standards. So we've got to do significant work, new kitchens and bathrooms, rewires, and that in turn also impacts on ODS's resources available to do standard voids, which obviously impact on these relet times. But there is a big piece of work, and people are working very, very hard to actually get these numbers down.
Fantastic, thank you. My point was more, and I don't know, maybe someone did mention this, and I'm sorry if I missed it. Could we have, this is going to be sounding so mundane, but could we have the where there are a couple of ones where the metric isn't? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else it would have been, but I couldn't see. It wasn't sort of like it says total standard relet time house mark definition for the layman amongst us. Could we just have it? And then after that in days, because otherwise I don't want to, like, I know that sounds silly probably, but it would just really help. And I do I understand sort of the process and the things that are happening behind the scenes on that, and some of that work that you're doing is really positive. And again, another sort of jargony thing, I'm guilty of it with teaching stuff all the time, is when you say major void, is that like it was in a really bad condition rather than it's a really big house?
Yeah, it's the condition, and it really it goes back to some key components such as kitchens and bathrooms, if there was major rewires needed, and in the house smart definition you can exclude the time it takes to carry out the major elements of work from the overall time frame. So we report on major voids separately, as a separate figure. As I say, some of them, I mean, essentially you've got to be consider what would someone have to have been moved out, decanted for this work to have been done, because obviously we do kitchens and bathrooms while people are in their homes anyway, so they really have to be the pretty bad ones to fall into that category. But yeah, that's what major voids are. Standard voids are something which doesn't have those major elements in there.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That helps. And then sort of moving on to a different one, on the EPC one, I know we've discussed this a bit already, but I've completely forgotten what. I remember now. So you mentioned that you're doing a longer piece of work on that at the moment, and you're currently going out and sort of doing all the. Will there be a time when we sort of know? Is there kind of an aim to like know pretty much all the EPCs so that we could then have an understanding of where, because I know that currently like where we're at says NA, is the goal that at some point that's a number or that's a kind of like percentage that we know that we can measure ourselves against? Because it sounds like at the moment that's moving around a bit, but I may have completely misunderstood what you said. So
I could come in on that, Amy. Yeah. So yes is the answer to that. So we have commissioned some additional work in this area so that we can understand sort of where the EPCC certificates are, and that is, as Amy said, is underway. So in due course we will have a full picture on that front, which is obviously what we need to have in order to know where we target our interventions. And sort of separate to that then is a sort of is the Bailey Garner work, which is sort of targeting the 316 kind of SHDF properties that are currently in the programme. But of course they are, we're at 316 and are not obviously the full sort of 30% percentage, but we have a number of years to go on that, and we are hopeful that there will be future sort of opportunities for us to bid for money, for additional kind of schemes. It's a challenging area. There's a lot of work to do on this, and I guess the only other thing I would say is in terms of the work Malcolm is doing is as we look at decency levels, etc., is that we start to look at this as a holistic whole, so that refurb work and so retrofit work and decency kind of come together, and that we're kind of thinking it in a programmed kind of way. So it will help us move ahead on this agenda.
I wonder, I mean, this will probably be a recommendation as well, but I wonder if it does sound like the current target that we're looking at almost doesn't measure the different bits of work that are currently being undertaken. I don't know if it would be possible, but to get kind of like almost interim targets on like where are we at in doing the kind of big piece of work on what the current EPC ratings are, where are we at on doing the work on meeting this particular thing. Does that make sense? Because at the moment it feels like it's encompassing 3 different bits of work and isn't telling, and therefore isn't necessarily telling the full picture. But I don't know if that will be possible or too much work or something.
It's completely possible, because actually in the background that work is happening, so we just need to either sort of just ensure that the narrative sort of describes that a little bit more clearly, so you can kind of see that kind of story. And I mean, it is an evolving piece of work as well, as we sort of move through the kind of MTFP periods and the budget setting. So I mean, I will take that away, and next time we return, we will kind of just cover that kind of picture a bit more clearly. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. That would be really helpful. Sorry, I have a couple more questions for me, and then I think I'm done. Just on the rent collection, I don't understand when you, so I'm looking, where is it? Let me get friendly control F. Right. Yes. So it says at the end of we're currently running at an 11% decrease from the same time last year, but this is due to the, I'm confused. What's the 11% decrease? What does a decrease mean in this context? Are we collecting less rent, and if so, why?
No, if I can come in on that, it's 11% decrease in the cash value of arrears. So the arrears have been coming down, which has been really good news. And the percentage figures, one of the things with this particular indicator is that you don't actually, it's profiled throughout the year. So in your first couple of months, the most you can ever expect to have collected is around about 60%, and then goes up month by month. So it only becomes possible to get the full target essentially at the end of March. Because it's the end of March figure. So as the debit rolls through the year, the amount collectible and the amount collected changes. As at the very start of the year, you've only got your arrears plus 1 week's rent as your amount collectible. And then unless you collect your entire arrears value in the first week of the financial year, you'll never hit 100% in week 1.
So okay, so actually we are in a, even though the numbers don't, we're actually kind of in a better, okay.
We track it with a profile of where we expect to be against the actual end year target. So there's intervention figures in the way. So if we were getting behind where we thought we should be, then we look to intervene. But it's looking positive currently.
Fantastic. I just think, again, sort of on the clarity of the report, be really helpful if it, because it does, I'm not sure it says of total. I think even then I probably need it explained to me, but I think that I'm looking at some percentages and then it's saying another percentage, but it's not saying of kind of it, that lost me slightly. So it'd be great if that could be clarified. And then final one is on sort of the question of prevention duty. Obviously I understand there are particular challenges at the moment, and I was just wondering if I could sort of, you've obviously got, kind of where some of those are coming from, and I've just had 2 kind of questions, and I mean, this is purely anecdotal, but do you find that, you said that it was picking up towards the end of September, do you find that the summer is a particularly difficult time for that? Because anecdotally I know it's really hard to find things on the private rented sector in the summer, and also probably students, everything, academic year, etc. There just always seems to be a horrific time to try and rent. And also, do you see sort of the impact of some of the other pressures we're seeing from things like short-term lets on that as well?
I can come back on that one. Yeah. I've never heard staff talk about that, and teams talking about the summer. I'm not saying it isn't there, but we haven't experienced all that's been raised with me personally. I think where with the 49% that's been recorded in this report, it seems it's really come about from two things. One is all the things we've been talking about all evening around, you know, cost of living and people struggling with rent rises, frozen LHA, etc. But what we also are seeing in the service is major changes to respond to that increase in demand that then has led to temporary dips in this measure. But basically, we have doubled the number of prevention duties that we take every year now, literally doubled. So the number of staff who are working on prevention has also maybe not doubled, but risen significantly as well. Previously, we would only have one team who did prevention duties. We now have 4 teams working across all the private, social sectors, doing all sorts of specialist work, working with landlords to mediate. It was all part of our transformation program last year. All those staff have had to be trained, supported, new procedures put in place. It really is setting us up in the long term to have an even stronger offer. And I think having done those changes, it's the only reason why some of these figures are still containable and as good as they are, as in with a huge increase in demand, that increase in capacity has been really helpful. But obviously, whenever you do a change like this, there are dips in outcomes and performance in regards to percentage terms, because we're doing double the amount of work and we've got lots of new staff learning that process. So I think it's one that we need to keep a close eye on going forward, and it's a dual thing between that kind of the change within the council, but also the huge pressure and traditional ways of preventing homelessness, like sourcing new accommodation, is very difficult with a local housing allowance held down still and won't be going up until April. But I think we've got the makings there of it should return back towards the profile as time goes on, is what we're hoping to see, and I think we're starting to see the early signs of that.
Fantastic. And it sounds a bit like, so absolute numbers of people supported is probably increasing, but due to current circumstances, the percentage has dropped, and that's it's a difficult time. Thank you. That's been really, really helpful. Really, really useful. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? Any councillors got any final questions? Any more? Not seeing any. So thank you all for coming along and for supporting. Yes, Alice.
Sorry, can I just double check? So you mentioned a possible recommendation around the EPCs, but were you happy with Neris to just come back to the next meeting with that information, or did you want to recommend?
I think it would be helpful to formalise it as a recommendation, partly so it reminds me next time to talk. So we talk about it and keep it in process.
Yeah. So you want it to go to cabinet, just so what you do? Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Oh no, actually that's fine. It doesn't need to go to cabinet. It's
okay. So I'll pop it in the minutes then, and we can follow it up that way as matters arising.
Yeah. Easy. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Okay, and brilliant. So our next item, so we're jumping to item 8 now. So housing complaint handling performance for Q1 and Q2 2023 to 2024. So we've got, just to say, I think Amy, and is it just you, Amy? I don't think you've got another report, so feel free to listen, but also feel free to go and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
And yes, so for this one, Councillor Smith, Neris, and Bill, I don't know who would like to kick it off.
I'll just offer a little overview. I think overall this is a positive report. I think this is an area where we can always try and do better, but I think the combination of investment in new technology used by ODS to communicate with tenants I think it's already showing results and will help us improve in the short term, and in terms of managing complaints, I think now that QL is now that we're able to use that fully, I think we'll also see the benefits of that, hopefully, and that will help us as well. But yeah, over to Bill.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I mean, certainly the locale system in operation with ODS has really been a game changer. And if there are any concerns that the tenants report with low satisfaction scores, as mentioned before, there's a live dashboard that team leaders and planners look at, and they call back any person with a low score within 15 minutes. That's their service standard. So that if there were any issues, they're picking them up really quickly and avoiding complaints, which is really positive going forward. In terms of the report, it's fairly self-explanatory. It's got information regarding the numbers of complaints in quarters 1 and 2, both for ODS and for OCC. Mentioned in there some changes to the categories of complaints and whether they can be upheld, not upheld, or partially upheld. We've got clarification in the Housing Ombudsman's consultation that the partially upheld option will disappear, and those will be considered as upheld going forward. So we're already starting to make those changes. As you can see, 77% of the City Council's complaints were upheld, and ODS they had 68%. They did, however, have a number which were reassigned back to OCC. In terms of OCC, the main areas complained about were tenancy management, property services and ASBIT, and ODS plumbers, carpenters and planners, as well as some joint complaints between ODS and property. Key thing in OCC is quality of service and an element of communication, but certainly in ODS, communication was the key theme in complaints, and we do expect that to reduce as locales continues to be rolled out. It started in July, and it does mean that everyone gets a reminder. They can see where their operative is on the map when they're the next job, and they can contact the operative to avoid any missed appointments if they happen to be in the garden or next door or whatever. We've been reviewing our customer journeys, so looking how we can actually improve communication. And that involves looking at appreciative inquiries with tenants, where we've been having different processes such as exchanges, successions, and so on. We also understood from tenants that they were having difficulty in getting hold of their tenancy management officer, either by email or by phone, and part of that was for pretty much 3 to 3.5 days per week they'll actually be with other customers, so they can't take those calls. So we're trying to redirect people to the contact center, where there are 50 odd people trained to actually take tenancy calls. We are recruiting to a customer care and complaint manager. As mentioned in our previous complaint report back in August, we do have a customer care and complaint officer in post. So the manager post, the closing date was yesterday, and I've got 49 applicants to shortlist from. So I'm really hoping for a good pool of candidates. Neris and I will be interviewing in a couple of weeks' time. ODS have implemented customer service training and toolbox talks with their operatives, and they've identified the need to provide better information and better explanations to tenants. Team leaders now required to take ownership of large scale work. So if there's someone who's got a plumbing job, a carpenter job, some electrical work, then the team leaders are actually pulling everything together. So it's one job rather than lots of people going in at different times. We've mentioned locales already, and the operatives have been using the Versa mobile solution, which is linked in, which is part of Arian's QL system, so they can actually in real time book surveys, update customer details while they're on site. The follow-up works, and as Malcolm mentioned earlier, one of the questions on their form that's been added in is, do you have any damp and mold? And then obviously that's reported through. Communication complaints did actually drop to 5 in September. Whether that's because of locales or not, just remains to be seen, but it's a positive step. I mentioned the Housing Ombudsman's been consulting on a complaint handling. Well, it's already got a complaint handling code, and as you remember from our last meeting, we took our current self-assessment through this panel. The local government ombudsman and local government social care ombudsman, as well as the housing ombudsman, have been consulting on a joint code, which, if it comes into being, which will be in April, will mean that all of the local authorities will have to follow the code across the organisation. Excuse me, not just within housing. So for us, the changes are relatively minor. Changes such as the clarification on upheld, not upheld, such as confirming that complaint responses must be sent out within 10 days of receipt. Some organisations were doing it within 10 days of the acknowledgement, so they've clarified that. And the big thing is that it is on a statutory footing, that we must comply with the code. We did have some disappointing news in July. We were issued with our first complaint handling failure order. There was an element of human error, but also an element where there were single points of failure identified within our housing ombudsman link officers, or the ombudsman link officer inbox, which comes in a corporate level, where when things were coming in, it was a single point of failure. There was no one else would be notified. Now there's auto forwarding, so when there is any notification from the housing ombudsman, I get alerted, Neris gets alerted, the managers in the corporate policy team get alerted, as does Richard Wood. So we've got visibility of things, so we can make sure it doesn't happen again, can't happen again, and we'll happily have had that tested, and it actually works fine. I mentioned the obviously ODS. They've been using the complaints in QL from the outset, and they designed the process so that the council's complaints process can be just woven into it. So it was designed with that in mind. It's now become a corporate priority, especially given we've got a joint complaint handling code coming in. So we're expecting that will be live for the rest of the council by April. I mentioned we've got a new customer care and complaints manager will be coming in, and they will be making sure that the performance case that's here, case studies, lessons learned are constantly updated on our website going forward. And then for next time, when we come to you after in the new financial year, assuming you want to, then we'll be bringing the comparison reports for quarters 3 and 4. So, any questions?
Thank you, Bill. That was a really helpful introduction. Just what is a complaint failure? What's it? What handling notice?
Yeah. Complaint handling failure order is one of the powers that the Ombudsman has to issue against a landlord where they've failed to comply with instructions to respond either to the Ombudsman for information or for the to actually send out a complaint response. So we're required to send, in this case, it was a stage 2 complaint. We're required to send it out. It didn't go out. It didn't go out on time. And despite being warned, it was still overdue. So we got a complaint handling failure order. It was published in the quarterly digest of complaint handling failure orders that the Housing Ombudsman produced. We did alert corporate management team in the summer, and obviously of the mitigations that we've actually put in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. But yes, it is a directive. It's very much part of the Ombudsman's drive to push up quality performance in complaint handling. You've probably seen a large number of landlords have had multiple maladministration cases found against them, complaint handling failure orders, and so on. We are fortunately not in that arena, and I hope we never do get to that stage. I think our measures are robust, can still be improved, but obviously with a new manager coming in, that will give us some additional focus on that.
Thank you. That's helpful. No, basically, makes sense that what you're saying about human error and it being sort of a delay in communications rather than, that makes sense. In terms of sort of the key themes bit of the report, a few questions around that. One of them is about, so there's sort of the other category in ODS has sort of the second highest number of complaints. Is that really just random things, or is there were there any themes that were pulled out of those, anything that could be investigated there? And then also there's obviously there's a big difference in where the main complaints are in OCC and ODS, with communication being a key thing in ODS and service being a key thing with OCC. Is there a difference between is that an operational difference, or is that those are just different strengths and weaknesses of the two aspects? And then finally, the compensation, is it possible to kind of get a breakdown of kind of like numbers of individuals compensated versus amount of compensation paid, and an idea of what or under what circumstances compensation might be paid? I'm also aware, very sorry, other panelists, I forgot to bring you in first. So if you've any questions, I'll take you after those. Sorry about that.
Yeah, in terms of different services, obviously ODS are very much dealing with the bricks and mortar of day-to-day repairs. There's a whole range of things that, and there's so many different things that they can do. It could be that there's multi-trade jobs where one part is not communicating with the other. Obviously, I think the lessons learned is where you've actually put the implemented changes. I think that's where you get your flavour of the what actions have been taken. Obviously, customer service, the behaviour of the operatives, locales has certainly changed the outlook of operatives quite significantly, because if they're not tidy, they'll get a low mark, and then it will reflect on the score. So they're very keen to find out how well they did each week, and they're ringing into the team leaders asking how they've been doing. So certainly different. There are different services within OCC. Again, there's a range of different services. We have had difficulties within tenancy management over the last year. We've actually recruiting to 5 permanent vacancies currently, and the interviews for those are next week. So there have been issues with resources being available, which has impacted on the service we've been able to provide. We've had agency staff in, some of whom will be very good, some of whom have not been so good, and obviously those can cause problems. We are hoping now that we'll get some really good people. They're interviewing over three days. They've got some good candidates, and fortunately, hopefully, we can get all 5 and potentially some more from that. In terms of the breakdown, yeah, we can certainly provide you more information at the next meeting regarding the breakdown of compensation. I mean, just as an example, there was a case where someone's had some problems with a sewage pump, where there was an electricity cable or wire within the system kept shorting out, which then stopped the sewage problem, the pump working properly, which meant that someone had some sewage coming back into their home, and we've got that resolved now. And just an example, they were offered £250 in compensation for the problems that they've had. So one of the things that we do, you look at the impact on the person, the time taken to resolve it, any out-of-pocket expenses. I mean, I mentioned at the previous meeting, the biggest one that we've had is where there was difficulty in a new build development because the postcode wasn't set up properly. So for a number of weeks, people couldn't actually access the utilities. They couldn't set up accounts. They had to eat out and so on. So obviously, it's very different for every case is different. So, and generally we look to the housing ombudsman's payouts. If a case had actually gone there, we keep an eye on that kind of level of compensation, so that we do actually act as if we were in that position.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know. And just the stuff about the other category in ODS, was that what you were talking about at the beginning with locales and the fact that it's a range of different things? And
yeah, I think we need to. I want to just understand a bit more what other means. I agree. I think that the detail of the changes being made will probably reflect what other is, but I think we could get some clarification from ODS.
Thanks. I think that would be really, really helpful. Any other questions that people have? Not seeing any. Fantastic. In which case, I think that's all wraps up my questions. Thanks very much for answering all those, Bill. That was really, really helpful to know. And it's good to see this coming back quite frequently. It's really interesting to see and to hear about as well. So I think that brings us on to our final item. And also, I think you're not on the final item, so enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks so much again. Is the presentation on the City Sanctuary accreditation. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Smith, Neris Parry, Richard Wood and Stephen Cohen to deliver the presentation and introduce that item.
I think this is Stephen's. Yeah, Stephen's going to do this.
Yeah, do you want to say anything before I start?
No, I've got some comments, but I'll save them for afterwards because you might be repeating what you say anyway.
That's fine. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I shared the slides in the report. I'm not sure if you want me to share them or I could just summarize today, conscious of your time. If I just...
Yeah, happy for you to summarize and pull out the key points. Yeah. I think we probably got pre-prepared questions from your presentation anyway.
No, that's fine. So yeah, it's just to say that intention of giving you this update today is really to sort of show what the council's doing in this area, take on any sort of feedback from yourselves as we go along this journey to become a accredited council of a sanctuary. This project sitting between sort of housing services and the communities team, and there will also be an opportunity for councillors to feed into the cabinet process as we're intending on taking a sanctuary report and the action plan which is required as part of the accreditation in the spring of next year. So just a very brief timeline on the City of Sanctuary, what it is and the accreditation project. So essentially the City of Sanctuary is a charity that was set up back in 2005, and they've got sort of a specific aim to urge sort of institutions and councils to provide a more welcoming environment for those fleeing persecution and war. And in Oxford, there is quite a long history with a City of Sanctuary motion going back to 2019, affirming Oxford to be a sort of City of Sanctuary. In 2020, the City of Sanctuary charity brought in the award or the accreditation, and that's because they wanted to go further, extend the reach of what they're doing and sort of embed a more institutional approach. So they brought in an award accreditation program, and different institutions like libraries, universities, and other institutions can apply and demonstrate how they are becoming a sort of institution of sanctuary. So in 2022, there was a further council motion around officers developing a sanctuary strategy in light of the Ukraine and Afghan conflicts. And in May of this year, Oxford councillors affirmed their intention to become an accredited council of sanctuary at the Sanctuary Fair jointly with the University of Oxford and Asylum Welcome. So it is an action within the Thriving Community Strategy that we develop an action plan and become an accredited council of authority of sanctuary, and also aligns with two of the four corporate objectives, enabling an inclusive economy and supporting thriving communities. So just a brief overview of what we're doing with this particular accreditation is we're very much focused on a kind of bottom-up organic approach. So we're we've contracted Asylum Welcome to do a needs assessment, and that's actually engaging people with lived experience and stakeholders working with asylum seekers and refugees living in Oxford or Oxfordshire, and that's really to gain an understanding of the main issues and barriers they face when living in Oxford or accessing council services. And the idea really is rather than the council sort of creating a plan that doesn't necessarily respond to what the local residents actually, the issues that they're facing. The idea is that we gain a greater understanding of those before we develop the action plan in the new year. So I'll pause there. I guess the other thing to just mention, last thing, is that it is an evolving process, and the idea is that the accreditation obviously kickstart a review of the services that we run and how we're embedding the 3 criteria: learn, embed, share, that the City of Sanctuary advocate for. But it is supposed to be an evolving process, and the accreditation, once achieved, is reviewed every 3 years. So I'll just pause there and take any questions.
Fantastic, thank you. Can I ask other councillors if they've got any questions first? Brilliant. Okay, yes, Councillor Rule.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stephen. That was great. And one of the things I was going to say is that it seems to be quite clear that given all of the great work that Oxford is doing in this area, that it shouldn't be hard for us to accredit. And an awful lot of what we're doing is, like, a lot in terms of accrediting, we'll get a long way there by kind of demonstrating what we're already doing. But I'm also really glad to hear about the process working with Asylum Welcome to commission and plan moving forward. So I sort of had a question, and maybe it would like mark as a recommendation, unless you feel like this is something that's already happening perhaps. But one of the things I wondered is whether we could like ensure that this project doesn't sit like wholly with thriving communities, even though the action plan is sat there, but especially I know you mentioned housing, but also other services and other areas of the council, if this is about kind of embedding a welcome, the principle of welcome across everything that the council does. I don't know if that could be something that we could sort of recommend in terms of the scope of moving forward with the plan. And also, given, I suppose, that the criteria is actually quite specific in some ways, some kind of assurance that we're like planning to embrace the spirit of what City of Sanctuary is, and aim to go kind of further than, I suppose, sort of just demonstrating what we're already doing towards those, and using it as an opportunity to think much bigger. I had a few like specific things on housing that I know that like our approach, I guess. Actually, I'll pause there if that's okay, because I think that's one piece, and I'll rethink my final question because it might not be necessary, given your responses.
Yeah, I think sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to invite you to respond. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I suppose, yeah, with the first question, this is a council-wide project, accreditation project. That's the first thing to say. So even though it's sitting within sort of between the housing communities team, it is a council-wide project, and it's got support from the leadership of the council, and it is about not just focusing on specific departments. It is about improving the inclusivity and ethos across the council departments. So in the report, it mentions we are developing an internal sort of sanctuary group, and that will include lead reps from all of the corporate departments, so that there is that reach across the council. And then in terms of the second question, one of the recommendations is around celebrating Refugee Week, specifically in June. And so, you know, that's definitely one of our key targets for next year is around having a bigger celebration, linking in with Asylum Welcome and other organisations, and also developing a positive narrative as well of the influence of asylum seekers and refugees in the area. So if there's any specific sort of areas of recommendation, then we'd be happy to take on feedback around the spirit and celebration.
Fantastic. Does that answer your initial questions, Councillor Rule?
Yes, I might come back in a moment if that's okay. Thank you very much.
But are you still formulating the question? Okay, fantastic. In that case, I'll go to Councillor Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Stephen and team, for your work. So I've just got a couple of questions. Well, first of all, I just want to say really pleased about all the co-production work that's been done with people lived experience. Many organisations in the city who do this work day in, day out. Obviously, we did have a migrant champion in the council as well, the University of Oxford and all our universities. So it's really great to see all of that coming together. So I just wanted to ask, there was a steering group or some sort of group, I can't remember what it was called now, where the city council was talking about the sanctuary work with the county, and I was wondering what the county's role is in relation to the wider work that needs to be done, because obviously they have significant numbers of people that they need to house and find ways to work with. And then the other one really was around, given that there's record numbers of people now with insecure immigration status are also in the finding themselves on the street, and they're homeless as well. So I know there's only so much we can do as a local authority, but I was wondering, how does that fit into this scheme, if it does at all? And then the only other comment really is I really like the idea of celebrating people, particularly those who are being completely dehumanized by this government. There's a whole list of people being dehumanized by this government. So I think that's really wise. But alongside celebrating Refugee Week, I think it's really important that through this piece of work and through the Thriving Communities work, and indeed the council's wider work, that we actually don't just celebrate, we actually do more advocacy work on these issues as they come up. So, the mass demonization of refugees and migrants, and with wars in Ukraine and the bombing of Gaza and everything else that's going on, there's more and more people in our city who are actually really being directly impacted. Their family members, who they're desperately trying to assist. So I think all of that needs to be part of the wider story that we tell as a city of sanctuary. And then the final question I have is, I think you actually asked this question, Rosie, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, everyone, but I would like to understand better how this sanctuary work does fit into the inclusive economies work and everything else. So I know there's strands are included, but realistically, do we have enough what's what I'm looking for, resource, that's it, to do more than we currently are? And if we don't, that's completely understandable. But then I think we need to rethink how we can maybe try and get other institutions in the city to work on this issue.
I think, I don't know if that was just my internet, but you cut out a little bit, but I think the questions were still clear. So happy to pass back on those questions if you're happy to take them, Stephen, or pass on to someone.
Sorry, Stephen, one other clarifying question. Sorry, Chair. This is an important one. I just want to double check. In your presentation, you talk about City of Sanctuary. There was some sort of confusion going on between the local Oxford City of Sanctuary and the national one. So I'm just wondering, is this the national body that's involved in this accreditation? And is a local one as well or not? Thank you.
Yeah. Richard, do you want me to start and then?
Well, do you want to, Stephen, do you want to do the ones you're happy with, and Neris and I will come in on anything else?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So the first point about the county, so the accreditation is institution by institution. So the focus of this accreditation is obviously what Oxford City Council are doing. But we're well aware that within Oxford, we don't deliver all of the services or have influence for all of the aspects that we think are going to come out of the needs assessment that affect those residents with lived experience who are living in Oxford. So we are working collaboratively with the county, and once we get the needs assessment outcomes in the new year, we will be looking at a section on partnership work within the report, to where we can influence or work collaboratively with the NHS or the county on the services that they run. And I am aware that there is a motion tabled at the county for a sanctuary motion. I'm not sure the detail on that, but I believe that's coming in this month or last month. In terms of those with insecure immigration status, the needs assessment that Asylum Welcome are conducting does take their objective is to interview people with a variety of circumstance, and that includes those who are undocumented or living in our community. So it is very much captured within the objective of the project. Obviously, as you said, the actual response that the council can give in regards to things like housing is often dictated by the legislation, but certainly there is options and advice and a welcoming environment that can be offered to those without status. So that is certainly forms part of the project. In terms of the advocacy work, there's three main criteria with the City of Sanctuary Charity request that the council provide evidence to show they met their criteria. So learn, embed, share, and within the share criteria, one of the criteria is to look at national policy issues. So within this sort of accreditation, we will have to demonstrate the representations that may fall more on what the council and councillors are doing within that section. I don't know, Richard or Neris, you want to come in any more on that point, or
may I come in?
Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on that point. I mean, I think something we absolutely need to be advocating for is more safe, legal, planned routes for people to claim asylum in this country and take refuge in this country. And I think this links with what we were talking about earlier and the temporary accommodation pressures. You know, we've not been slow to sign up to planned government schemes where, you know, we've played our part previously, and we've undertaken to help rehome 8 households a year for the next 5 years. You know, we're very pleased to be part of those schemes. You know, we're very proud to be part of those schemes and recognise the benefit that having those households come to Oxford and contribute to city life, you know, brings to our city. But what we can't have is, you know, the random situation you know, that we've got at the moment with the Home Office putting, you know, over 200 men in the Holiday Inn at the Kassam, leaving them there for over a year, with most of them, you know, hearing nothing about their asylum claim, and then suddenly fast tracking them, which is the situation that we've got at the moment. So, you know, in the last month or two, you know, had dozens of them presenting to the council as homeless and making demands on our housing services. You know, that's we need to be advocating for a different government policy that's, you know, more planned, you know, stops people taking the unacceptable risks crossing the channel in the way people are doing at the moment, and that we can be part of in a planned way, not what's going on at the moment. So yeah, I'm very pleased to take that up on many levels, and, you know, there's a big connection with what we were hearing about previously with the pressures on temporary accommodation and homelessness prevention services.
Yeah, and the plan is for the new year, as I say, to take a further report, more detailed report to Cabinet, so councillors will at that time also be able to review, you know, and the intention is to also sort of attach the application, and, you know, if there's any additions at that stage that councillors want to add, that can be done. And then the last point regarding resources, I don't know, Richard, if you want to come in on this point, or
well, I suppose sorry, I'm on mute then. I suppose that way I see it is we probably need to do the needs assessment first. And once that comes back and is clear about what is required, and then we have those conversations across the authority around what actions need to do to deliver on those, that would then inform the conversation about resourcing. And if it's if resourcing is adequate to deliver the plan or not. So that's probably part of that onward conversation as we go back to Cabinet with the report on. Once that's all been done, we can be clear on the resourcing that's required to deliver it.
Brilliant, thank you. And does that sort of address the questions that you asked, Councillor Aziz? Fantastic. I'm going to go. Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Dunn, and then I'll move back to Councillor Rule. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for all your work on this. My comments and questions are a bit similar to both Rosie's and Shyster's, actually, but I'll go ahead anyway. So with Rosie's point, it's really good to hear that the City of Sanctuary is all encompassing, and it will include housing and, you know, not just community services as well. That's really good to hear. Because I think one of the concerns I have is that some asylum seekers do end up homeless. So I just want to make sure that it is a sustainable model that we'd have. And also, I think on Shyster's point as well around the feeding in, she mentioned Hosnier did a lot of work on this. And I was wondering if there's any scope for us to have like a cross-party group where we can feed into this work, because there are a lot of councillors who, you can tell there's like a lot of us in this room who are quite passionate on this, and then also there's councillors who have experience working on this. So I'm wondering if there is something where we can, Asylum Welcome are doing incredible work and it's really great, they're feeding into it, but I'm wondering if there is opportunities for councillors to feed into it as well. And also the other thing was acknowledging that, yes, there's asylum seekers coming in from Ukraine, Afghanistan, but I'm wondering what we're doing around like the migrants that are already here and have been living here for a while. Like I think there's almost a third of Oxford residents are migrants. So yeah, it'd be good to know on that level as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dunn. Are you happy to take those questions now, and then we'll take Councillor Rule's question?
Yeah, I can touch on both of them. Neris or Richard, please come in. So for this accreditation project, there will be a report that comes back to Cabinet next year, and that will show kind of the development of the action plan and the application which is needed to achieve the accreditation. But as I mentioned earlier, that is a starting point. It's not supposed to be a fixed sort of endpoint. It's an ongoing process, and what we're planning to have is an ongoing internal group and an ongoing partnership group with key stakeholders and those with lived experience to carry on beyond the accreditation, to provide some accountability on the actions and respond to any developments or look at specific issues that may need a working group and so forth. In terms of the councillor work cross-party, that's probably something maybe more probably for councillors to consider, probably outside of my remit, I would say, and perhaps something for Alice to come back on what the options are, because we're sort of tasked with delivering this project, but in terms of ongoing, that may be other governance mechanisms that there might be that can feed into it. On the second,
sorry, just to jump in there,
yeah.
I was going to ask whether it would be possible to, I mean, I don't know if it necessarily works with timings of this committee, but whether it would be possible for scrutiny to have a look at the application form as well. So I might just get Alice in here so we can kind of wrap this one up and then bring you back in, if that's okay. Alice, yes.
Yeah, so Stephen and I have had a couple of conversations just about timescales and bits and bobs like that. And with the report to Cabinet in the new year, that would normally fall within the same timescales to go to the main scrutiny committee. So I would anticipate that, obviously, depending on what else is on the forward plan at that point in time, I would anticipate that this report would go to main scrutiny. So I suppose a simple answer is that would be an opportunity for cross-party consideration of the report. And then if there was anything further that the committee wanted after that to make in terms of recommendations, they could do that at that point. without wanting to sort of predetermine what might be recommended, but you might want to think about future updates on an annual basis or something like that as a committee. But yeah, if you've got any further questions, let me know.
Thank you. That's great.
I think that would be, I think in terms of sort of an immediate action, I mean, I'm on scrutiny committee, but I'm obviously not the chair, so and it's something we decide on together. But if that comes back to the report comes back to scrutiny, that would be great. And then maybe as a committee, we could request that sort of an update on this comes, as it's an ongoing piece of work, we could request it comes back annually, but obviously with sort of scope for kind of thinking about what the best timescale might be. If that sounds amenable to you, Paula. Fantastic. Okay, I think that sounds like a good way forward. Sorry to interrupt you, Stephen. Please continue.
No problem. So I think the question was around other groups who are living in the city, so migrants and so forth. And you mentioned around a third, and I think that tallies with what we understand. Around a third of non-UK born are living in the city. So the objective of the City of Sanctuary and this particular accreditation is mainly focused on those sort of seeking refuge and sanctuary, fleeing persecution and war. So that is the specific focus of this project. But as part of the needs assessment, Asylum Welcome are talking to a broad range of groups in different circumstances. So those with status, those without status, from different groups, including Europeans. But certainly it's something that we'll take on board and consider as part of the report.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks very much. I've just noticed some comments from Councillor Aziz in the chat. If we could try and refrain from using the chat, just because I literally only just noticed them, because I can kind of see a recommendation in there, but I'm not fully sure what the recommendation refers to. So I might bring you back in a minute, Councillor Aziz, just so we can tighten that up. And then unless Alice, you caught what that was in reference to. Okay. Sort of. Okay, so I think we'll go to Councillor Raw and then I'll bring you back in, Councillor Aziz, if that's okay, if you can formulate that into a recommendation. Councillor Raw, go ahead.
Thank you. And I agree with what others have said. It would be great to have like the kind of cross-party input. And before this, I had a number of things that I'd gone like through thinking about what are the things that I come across or what are the things that I've spoken to people about and areas that would need specific like scrutiny. So it would really be great to feed in. I wondered as well if depending on how it's formulated, if there's like a section on housing, whether that might be able to come to a future housing meeting of that report, for example, rather than just scrutiny, because I had a lot of like very specific housing questions, and maybe now isn't the time to ask about whether it can cover X, Y, Z, but it would be great to be able to feed that in at some point, if you like. So people's experience of finding houses, that kind of thing.
The suggestion is because of timings, it goes to full scrutiny, this report. But in terms of, because this is obviously an ongoing piece of work, this is my understanding of my suggestion, was that it then comes back to this panel annually.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So, yeah. but because of timescales, it can't come back to this panel before it goes to Cabinet.
Okay, because we're not meeting until March, but the Cabinet meeting is before. I see.
Yeah, that's why. It's nothing, but it's nothing, more complicated than that. If that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you. And then the second question I had was actually, this was the one I was struggling to formulate earlier, but you've already touched on it, Councillor Smith. So the question I was going to ask is about like the kind of urgent specific need immediately around around what the council can do, not just in terms of, I suppose, advocacy work, but preventative, like proactive and reactive work around managing situations where those who have been recently granted refugee status are now being evicted from asylum hotels. So I just wondered whether I could ask a question on that with the view to the fact that we're trying to accredit as a City of Sanctuary what we're kind of currently doing, if that's okay to ask. Thanks.
Fantastic. Pan back to you, Stephen, to pick.
Richard, do you want to come in on Eris?
Do you want me to start, Stephen, and then you can come in, and obviously Mary's got anything to add as well. Yeah, obviously that's a huge focus of our attention at the moment. With this sudden demand on housing services, because the Home Office really churning through their decisions, and obviously with very limited notice, then ending the accommodation offer for these individuals, and they then have to present to us as the housing authority for support. Stephen, I haven't got the figures off the top of my head. I don't know if you've got them, but maybe you can add in a second just to show panel what kind of numbers that we're having to deal with. We have been on the front foot with this though. So we have already invested in more resource to deal with what at the time was a potential rise in demand from people newly receiving their status, and that's been very fortunate. So we've been ready to kind of deal with that. So we do have a specialist housing options officer who is linked in with the hotel to provide assistance. In light of what we've seen now in recent weeks, we've actually increased that to 2 and moved another housing options officer to do that full time as well. It just shows you the kind of demand that we're facing. 2 officers having to move from core work to just this work with very limited grant funding from central government to support it. We also do have a wider support contract that it's Stephen, I'm right in saying it's Asylum Welcome who have that contract at the hotel. So you're closer to that commissioning. So I wonder if I'll pass over to you just to say what's included within that in a second. So this combination of support is going in from the city already to support people coming out of the hotels. We are already seeing a number present to us we've then had to put into temporary accommodation. So all this all night we've been talking about TAE pressure that's further added into that pressure. So and then equally we obviously have to apply the law in regards to our homelessness assessments, and some individuals will be in priority need and put into hotels, others will not be in priority need, and then that will potentially lead to more pressure and more rough sleeping on the streets as well. So it is a very difficult situation, but what everyone gets from us is that offer of support. So we are taking prevention and relief duties with everyone who's coming to us from the hotels, and everyone is getting advice and then support with trying to find housing before their accommodation ends at the Kasem. Stephen, did you try to hand back to you, just quickly mention a bit more detail on the contract, but also on any of those numbers if you got them to hand?
Yeah, so as Richard said, we're starting to see the effects of the streamlined asylum process, which was announced early in the year by the government to speed up the asylum claims from kind of the legacy backlog, and especially countries that have a high success rate. So in many ways, it's a positive that the individuals are getting their positive decision. And they can start to make a plan to move on from Home Office accommodation, but it's the sort of level of demand at the same time, which is the big challenge. So in the last sort of month or so, we've seen about 48 sort of referrals, so new cases referred to us, and we've taken about 23 duties, and we've got 8 cases now in hotels. That's just in the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks. So that obviously gives you a flavour, and we expect that to continue to Christmas. As Richard said, we've tried to be on the front foot. We got some additional funding from the Home Office in the summer, and we've proportioned that with a commission service to support for Asylum Welcome, to add some dedicated resource to connect up services in the community for 1 year. So that starts this week, and they're also flagging cases to us early, which is great, and they've been a great partner to support those on the ground. So and then the second part of that, as Richard said, is the statutory increasing the capacity to assess those cases and trying to find move on options in the private rented sector or other. We're also very conscious about rough sleeping. So we've been liaising with our rough sleeping team, and we're so far they have reported, because they meet regularly with St Mungo's, there aren't any cases that they're aware of that have come from Home Office accommodation, which is really positive. But we're very acutely aware that that's a key priority, is trying to prevent rough sleeping. So we'll continue to be kind of liaising with our rough sleeping team on that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Neris.
Then on top of all of the operational work that the team is leading on is I also chair a sort of strategic kind of meeting specifically on the Kassam Stadium Hotel. So and that's a partnership wide meeting, kind of citywide, with support providers, health, county council, etc., sort of all contributing, because there's multiple kind of issues running across a kind of that hotel. But I also then sit on the Silver Migration Partnership, which is then the broader kind of partnership that sits across the whole of the county, that kind of encompasses and brings together all of the different kind of strands of migration work that we are all sort of managing and dealing with. So whether it's Ukraine, and I guess my observation a little bit of that space is it's an incredibly stressed system, with each district having to deal and managing kind of quite different things. Some have contingency hotels, you know, we have a large hotel for single men. Whitney, for example, has a large hotel for families. Cherwell and Vale are dealing with sort of consolidation of sort of other matters onto MOD land, etc. So it's a very complex picture across the county, and there's a lot of support work. There are specific kind of capacity and housing officers working to try and alleviate and coordinate across all of these different kind of strands, and so we have visibility kind of across each other, and supporting each other really as a county on those. On the different bits. So I guess it's just a reflection of the more strategic side of the work as well. Health are heavily involved, schools are involved. Obviously, you know, there's implications for county on a number of different matters. So I just thought I'd add that so you have a sense of that as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And Councillor Aziz, did you want to sort of just provide?
Yeah.
I'm not sure a recommendation at this point or a sort of features.
Yeah, absolutely. And without trying to extend this meeting any longer, also the issue of modern slavery really plays into this City of Sanctuary work as well, which I know we can bring up at scrutiny. But yeah, sorry, I also forgot what the recommendation was. However, the caffeine kicked in and I remembered what it was now. It was in relation to advocacy and what I was saying and others here, including Councillor Linda Smith, about alongside celebrating Refugee Week, which is really important, we also would like the council to be advocating on safe and legal routes, because that ultimately is one of the key things we must do in order to stop this human misery in the first place. So that was really the recommendation. And then the other point was about scrutiny, but you've already covered that. So thanks, Chair.
Fantastic. Did you get that one, Alice? Brilliant. And did you want to sort of raise the modern slavery thing as a question now, or just feed it into the...
Yeah, feed it in, and also sexual violence as well, which is sadly very prevalent amongst the individuals that we are trying to work with. So I think that needs to be highlighted as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Any final questions? Not seeing any, in which case I think that wraps us up. Thanks so much to all of you for coming along and for all your helpful questions and helpful answers. I think all we need to do now is note the date of our next meeting, and all of these are going to be remote going forwards, and welcome all of the new joiners to our meeting today, and thank you to all the officers that have come along. Alice, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick reminder for some, or maybe the first time we've heard this information, but as part of the budget review group, I just want to say that there is a meeting on the 9th of January at 6 p.m. via Zoom, where members of this panel will be invited to help scrutinise the housing element of that meeting. I will circulate diary invites very, very shortly, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of the date.
Thank you very much. It is in my diary, but I've forgotten about it. So helpful reminder. Brilliant. Well, I will see a lot of you then. Fantastic. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.